Hello there. My name is John Rallison. I am the pastor at Journey of Life Lutheran Church in the Lake Nona area of Orlando, Florida, and you have somehow found yourself entangled with something we call Dig Deeper. These are Bible enrichment studies that you can use for individuals and small groups. We have them recorded both as a video Bible study on YouTube and as a podcast for streaming, download, whatever you can do with podcasts. And our website is www.journeyoflife.org. Welcome. So we are in the middle of a series called Ordinary Time. In the church here, we're at the time between the holidays, which is called Ordinary Time. You got Advent and Christmas, and you got Lent and Easter. But the time between those, where there's no major holidays, is called Ordinary Time. And that's where we are now. And so I thought it would be cool to do a series where we think about the kind of things we need to think about just during ordinary, everyday, day-to-day life. Really the life most of us are living most of the time. And so I came up with this list, and it's certainly not an all-inclusive list, but I think it's a good list for our thoughts. The kind of things that we need to think about in ordinary time. Gratitude, a release, is the idea of letting go of the past and the future. Vocation is the idea of our calling and what we're called to do at any given moment. Rhythm, that's where we are today, the rhythms of our life. Next week seemed good to follow up on rhythm with disruptions, because we all have disruptions in our lives too. And then on July 10th, we'll talk about the idea of openness. And then on July 17th, we're going to talk about the idea of staying centered in our lives. So that's where we've been, and rhythm is where we are, and that's where we're going, and I'm glad you are here with us. Just to kind of think through these things, I will tell you this, that this edition of Dig Deeper is going to stay probably pretty close to the sermon from last Sunday. So if you were in church last Sunday and you're listening to this, it's going to sound pretty familiar, although I never quite know where these things are going to go. So there might be something happening here that I'm not anticipating. We'll see. We'll see. So the idea of rhythm. Rhythms come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and forms. Some rhythms are unmistakable. They're familiar, and they are really when we're happening in our lives. They really just can't be avoided. Like, here's a rhythm that can't be avoided. I think you've heard that rhythm before. But see, that's just kind of driving, right? Some rhythms just drive our weeks. Monday mornings, bam, every Monday, bam, every Monday, bam. So there's rhythms that really just force themselves upon us. And then some rhythms are more subtle. They're definitely still there, but they're a little milder in our lives. Like the smooth sounds of Kenny G. Yeah, I like the smooth sounds of Kenny G. But you could hear there's still kind of a rhythm going on there, right? And some of our rhythms are more like that. They're like light rhythms in our lives. And then sometimes our lives, while still having rhythm, it really just seems sort of jumbled up. And while they can be fluid and musical, you don't feel that driving rhythm quality like this particular piece of jazz. So there was obviously rhythm, right? I mean, rhythm is what holds the whole thing together, but sometimes the whole thing's tied together like We Will Rock You, and sometimes it's a little bit groovier like Kenny G, and sometimes it feels like there's a bunch of counter rhythms going on and stuff, but still all of those can be kind of like our lives in that there is a rhythm that's going on, but our lives act like different kinds of rhythm like that at different times. But it seems clear to me that we are rhythmic creatures. Even babies have a sense of rhythm, like this cute little baby here. For those of you who are listening, there's a dad going,
Beatboxing baby.
and the baby is just jamming out to his dad's little beatboxing. So we get rhythm very early on, much earlier than we understand speech. We already seem to respond to rhythms. Babies in the womb even respond to music. So we are rhythmic creatures, whether it's the boom boom ch, boom boom ch, or that really complicated, layered kind of rhythm thing. We are rhythm creatures. We seem to be built for rhythm. And it's no surprise that we are built for rhythm because our whole universe is really rhythmic. If you are, let me just tell you what's on the screen in case you're listening. I have a model of the solar system on the screen, and it's kind of going around, and that's just kind of help us think for a minute about rhythms in our life. I mean, there's a sort of a big kind of a boom boom rhythm of our lives in the years. You can't escape the years. The years, especially marked by the kind of sub rhythms of the seasons, you can't escape the years as a rhythm in our lives because it's built into the very planet we are riding through space on, right? Because the planet between the elliptical orbit and the tilt of the axis creates this rhythm that is a essential and unmistakable part of our lives. So we have these giant rhythms, and then we break that into months. We also have a rhythm of weeks. Most of us do, even though our weeks are divided up differently. We obviously have the rhythm of the day. Sunrise and sunset are very visceral. They're very primal. Sunrise and sunset, along with the months, being governed by the moon, and governs tides and things too, are very primal. They're like the year. They're sort of almost built in, and sunrises and sunsets speak to people's hearts. They stop when they see a sunrise or a sunset because it really does sort of mark the rhythm of our day. Some of us have a rhythm of vacations. We take vacation about the same time every year. The holidays, of course, provide us rhythms for our lives. Birthdays, some people are big birthday people. The idea that birthdays come boom, boom, boom once a year. Our meals provide a rhythm to our lives. Even at a very basic level, we are rhythmic creatures. We have our breath and our heartbeat, and those are absolutely rhythmic things in our lives. Our breathing and heart rate change based on what's going on, but they are a basic rhythm, and they will keep on going as long as we have life in our bodies. And so we are rhythmic creatures, and that's kind of just what I want to think about today with you, is the idea of rhythm in our lives, the things that kind of occur with regularity, whether or not it's as minutely and quickly kind of regular like a heartbeat, or whether it's a long, slow rhythm like a year. We have rhythms in our lives. And that's kind of part of what happens during this ordinary time. They kind of just happen no matter what, right? These rhythms keep going. So in the Old Testament, there were some rhythms that were set out in the law to govern the people of Israel after God brought them out of Egypt. And so I want to spend some time talking about those rhythms. I want to talk about those rhythms because I think they set a good example for us. We, of course, don't live under the legal system of the Old Testament. That was much more than just a spiritual guidance. That was a legal system governing a people. But it also, when those things are handed down, they are handed down for a reason, and we can take that and apply it to our lives, the principles behind it to our lives, even if the particular rhythm doesn't apply to the lives of those of us who live now. So the first and maybe one of the most basic rhythms of the Old Testament life, it actually harkens all the way back to creation. It is the Sabbath day. Exodus 23 verse 12 says this: 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. So this Sabbath day regulation actually was handed down in Exodus 23. Excuse me. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me see here. I'm going to clip this out, I think. Yeah, I'm going to have to clip this out. Golly. So Exodus 23 verse 12 says, 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien will be refreshed. So first of all, let's talk about when this came into play. This is Exodus chapter 23, so it is after Charlton Heston brought the Israelites out of Egypt. No, it was Moses, not Charlton Heston, I know. But you remember the story of the Israelites being brought out of Egypt by the mighty hand of God with the 10 plagues, and then coming to Mount Sinai to get the law. Well, here they are, and God is telling them how they're going to live. And it's a peculiar thing. There's a lot of fresh, new ideas in the things that God hands down for his people. He says, if you're going to live my way, among the other things, first of all, a long time ago, God told Abraham when he was calling Abraham to start a new nation, it was not a nation that would look out for itself. It was a nation through whom all the world would be blessed. So that's different. And here we get another different thing too. God hands down this regulation that says work for 6 days, but rest on the seventh. And that's a big change. That's a new thing. And there's some big ideas behind it for people. And I think maybe they're ideas we might need to rehear again. In Egypt, they didn't get a break. In Egypt, you work 7 days. You get up, you work, you go to bed, you get up, you work, you go to bed. And now they come out of Egypt, and God tells them, you're going to work for 6, but you need to rest on the seventh. 1 out of every 7 days is a rest. And important to note here, too, is the care for all things, which is also a pretty new idea. He says that your animals need rest, and your servants need rest, and even the aliens who are traveling in your area or have come to work in your area, or maybe even have become enslaved somehow in your area, they all get the rest. Everybody gets the rest, not just the special people. So that's a big deal about this rhythm of the Sabbath that we need to bear in mind for ourselves, that the day of rest. And it's not without a point. There are a lot of things wrapped up in the idea of taking a Sabbath. And the first thing is that you're not God. You're not responsible or in charge of everything. You are a human being here on life. Here on the earth, and you have a life, but your life is more than your work. You are not just your job. You are not just what you can produce. You are not just your role. You are a person. And that even includes things like mom and dad and things like that. You are more than just mom or more than just dad. You are a person. But in this particular idea of the Sabbath, what's really going on is God is telling people they got to back off, and they got to realize that life is more than work, and that God is the ultimate provider anyways. The Sabbath regulation about not working did not get suspended for planting and harvest time. And that's especially a big deal in harvest time, because when stuff is ripe, it's ripe. When it's ready to harvest, it's ready to harvest. And yet, even if the grain is in the field and the heads are on it and the buds are I'm not like an agricultural guy, so I don't know. But even if it's like ready to harvest, you still take 1 day off a week. You and your servants and your animals and everybody. Why? Because ultimately your life is not in your hands. It is in God's hands. And so in other places in the scriptures, it says a Sabbath unto the Lord. And that points us to the faith aspect of taking a day off, scrambling. So many people just scramble, and they don't relax. They don't step back to live. And God says, you need to step back to live. You are more than your work. And so the Sabbath is a big deal, and it's a weekly rhythm to remind you that you are more than your work, and to remind you that our lives are ultimately dependent on God, not just on our scrambling. So that's one rhythm, the Sabbath. So one of those rhythms is also a Sabbath. It's a seventh, only this time it's years instead of days. Deuteronomy 15 verse 1 says this, at the end of every 7 years you shall grant a release. And that's a release from things like a debt and stuff like that. Listen a little bit longer here. A few more verses. This is scattered verses from Deuteronomy chapter 15. This is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care, lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing. And then he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him. Because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all the work and in all that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land, and therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy and to the poor in your land. And so listen to that. So every 7 years, debts are released. Whatever you've lent to someone else that you can hold over their head, that gets released every 7 years. And so people, bad things happen. People get in rough straits. All sorts of things happen, right? And in this land, which is kind of God saying, this is how I want my people to be. He's saying, listen, you are responsible for your life, and things are going to happen, but every 7 years we're going to hit the reset button on everybody's debt. You're not going to be a debt slave forever. Yeah, you might have to work for a while. And if you've made some really bad decisions, you might have to work. You might have to work for 7 years, but at the end of 7 years, boom, the reset button hits. And I'll tell you, I don't know, I haven't done any research, but I bet a lot of people learned their lesson. And when the 7-year reset button hit, assuming the Israelites actually practiced this, when the 7-year reset button hit, they didn't fall into the same debt trap again. Because this would be even for people who had been sold into indentured servitude or slavery because of the debt they owed. Let me read to you a little bit more from Deuteronomy chapter 15. This is beginning at verse 12, and I'm going to pick a few verses out of this. If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free. And when you let him go free, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. As the Lord your God has blessed you, so you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you, and therefore I command you this. So that's a pretty big deal, right? When it comes time to release the person from their indentured servitude, you don't just kick them out the door and say, well, whatever. This says when the indentured servitude, when you reach the end of the 7 years, you set him up. You set him up with, what did it say? Let me go back. It says, furnish him liberally, even. Not just grudgingly, but liberally. Furnish him out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. Why? Because people need a fresh start. I'm kind of having trouble imagining a society where every 7 years all the debts are canceled. We don't have indentured servants here, but sometimes it feels like it for people who are minimum wage workers and they've gotten themselves in some debt, and there's just no way ever to get out of it. And in fact, we do have indentured servants in our agricultural industry, even in America. But it's not legal, and it's sort of it's a twisted kind of thing, which is a subject for a whole nother time of thinking together. But right now we're just thinking about this. Imagine how few poor people there would be if every 7 years debts were canceled, people went free, and if somebody ended up in indentured servitude to the lender. When the lender let him go, he had to furnish him liberally out of all the lender's stuff so that this person who ended up indentured servitude had a fresh start, and not only a fresh start, but a fresh start with some resources liberally given. This would be a different place, a different society. And this is the rhythm that God set up. He said, press the reset button on people. And we don't have that rhythm in our society, but maybe we need that rhythm in our lives and our relationships, right? Maybe we need to just keep in mind to press the reset button in our relationships. And maybe we can add that to maybe a New Year rhythm or something, a time to just, in a regular, habitual, rhythmic way, press the reset button on the relationships in our lives, and try to bring them back, to make them whole and things like that. So this is a big deal, in this rhythm of the Sabbath year. And it's also, so it's about care for the poor and care for the land. I didn't read you the part where it says every 7 years you also don't plant the land. You let it grow wild. And of course, in this kind of agriculture that they practiced back then, it would grow wild with basically the same stuff. And what that wild growth does is two things. Is first of all, it lets the land rest because it's not being tilled or anything like that. And the second thing is, along with the debt release and everything else, part of the instruction is to leave the land fallow every 7 years, and that becomes a field for the poor people, and they can go gather what they need, the wheat, the barley, the grain, whatever, the grapes from the vineyards and things. So every 7 years, you were not supposed to work your own land, and you let poor people go in and take what they need. And so there's all this stuff wrapped into these rhythms that allow for certainly personal responsibility and decision making, but they also don't let people starve. And they provide a reset button for people who have learned their lessons, because I'll tell you, in today's day and age, some people get so far in debt that it's very hard to hit the reset button on their lives. And by the way, just a little side note, those of you considering student loans are not dischargeable even in bankruptcy. So that's a hole you might never get out of if you think you're just going to get a federally guaranteed student loan, and then if things don't go well, you can declare bankruptcy and not worry about it. They have structured their laws, so they still, that can't be discharged. So we have the Sabbath day. Every 7 days we stop working. We take a rest. We remember that we are more than our production. We are more than our work. We remember that our lives ultimately depend on God, not just our ability to keep scrambling and doing our work. Every 7 years, the whole economic system resets. The slaves go free. Debts are released. And systems are in place to care for the poor. And then the last one that I want to talk about here is, well, actually, I think, there's two more. The next one I want to talk about is Passover. Passover is the next rhythm to talk about. So we had the rhythm based in days. 1 out of every 7 days, you take a rest. You remember you are more than your work. You remember you ultimately depend on God for your life, not your own scrambling. The second is based in the years. Every 7 years, we reset the debts. We reset things so nobody gets reduced to grinding poverty. So there's a chance to get out of that and a chance to learn your lessons and move forward. The third rhythm that is a big drum beat, a big rhythm in the life of Israel is the Passover. It's an annual feast celebrating and remembering God's deliverance of the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. Deuteronomy 16 verse 1 sort of gives the basic command. I'm just going to read it to you because it's good to actually read the scriptures while we're going through this. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover to the Lord your God, for in the month of Abib the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. And so the rhythm of Passover is to remember the rhythm of deliverance. There's several big pieces to Passover. One is it begins with the idea that God heard their cry, the cry of the people in slavery. God hears the cry of the people in slavery. He heard the Israelites in Egypt, and he responded. And so they, as they kept the Passover, they were reminded that God is a God who hears, and God is a God who delivers. God is a God who moves people from slavery to freedom, from oppression to celebration. And so the rhythm of Passover is the rhythm of freedom that we are called to celebrate, and we are continually reminded in the Old Testament, the Israelites are continually reminded that they are to treat aliens well. They are to treat slaves well. And it goes back to their time in Egypt, because you were slaves and aliens in a foreign land, and you know what it's like. So you don't do turnabout as fair play. You don't do, now it's my turn to be the man. You know what it's like, and so you treat them with compassion and care. So the rhythm of Passover is a rhythm of freedom, of deliverance, but it's also the rhythm of remembering where you are from, and so you don't treat other people as you were treated. That's all we're going to say on the Passover. Actually, I'm going to keep moving on. The last of the scriptural rhythms, that's hard to say that 5 times fast. The last of the scriptural rhythms that we are going to talk about is called the Year of Jubilee. And we don't actually have any evidence that the Israelites ever celebrated the Year of Jubilee. But here's what was supposed to happen. Leviticus 25 verse 10 says this: "You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan." And so in the Year of Jubilee, here's what's supposed to happen. Basically, the entire society resets. Land that was sold goes back to its original owner. People who had to move for economic reasons or whatever, they go home. And the Jubilee is when everything resets, when we realize that we are first and foremost, it's the rhythm of reminding ourselves that we are first and foremost people. And we are people caring for people and living with people. And all the other stuff is just stuff. And in fact, what God tells us is that the reason everything goes back to its ancestral owner is because in reality, it all belongs to God anyways. And so they were supposed to celebrate this truth with this 50-year rhythm of returning everything back to its ancestral owner. So God's people were supposed to live out these rhythms, daily rhythm, weekly rhythm, annual rhythm, 7-year rhythms, and 50-year rhythms. Rhythms to help them remember to live beyond their work. Rhythms to help them remember to care for the poor and to care for the earth. Rhythms to help them keep a mindset of liberty and freedom and release, and to remember their slavery and their time of being an alien in a foreign land. So when people are under their power, when other people are aliens or slaves in the land of Israel, they don't treat their aliens and slaves like they were treated. And they were even supposed to have this rhythm of resetting everything and just starting over, because we are more than anything a family, the family of people. So those are all, I think, really good rhythms to think about for our lives too, in terms of what they celebrate. But I want to offer you a couple of benefits of contemplating rhythms and maybe even adding rhythms to your lives. You might think about things you want to add intentionally. So here we go. The question is, what's breathing in your life? What rhythms move through your life regularly? One of the advantages of rhythms is they can free us from the tyranny of the urgent. We all have things pressing on us, things that are on the front burner, the things that really are trying to command our attention. And when we set rhythms in our lives and let those rhythms continue to beat in our lives, it can free us from the tyranny of urgency. And right now I'm thinking of rhythms that have to do with a self-care kind of things, relaxation kind of things. Like, for instance, a date night. Some couples set aside a date night, and it really, the house would have to be burning down for them to not have a date night on Friday evening or every other Friday evening, or whatever it is. But there's a rhythm, and that rhythm asserts itself strongly over whatever all the other urgencies are. Another regular rhythm that I can think of that helps free us from the tyranny of the urgent is daily devotions, and whatever that might look like for you. My wife and I read Jesus Calling by Sarah Young almost every day, unless there's something really that tears up that rhythm. And it really doesn't matter what we're doing. We just stop and do it. And it like the Sabbath that makes you stop what you're doing, these daily rhythms, or a weekly rhythm, like going to church, also is the same kind of thing. It frees you from the tyranny of the urgent. It lets you step back and say there are things that are important to do regularly that are not fires that need to be put out right now. I can let those go for a moment. For some people, exercise is the same way. They have a rhythm of exercise, of daily exercise or every other day exercise, whatever it is. But that's a time when they step back, and that is almost inviolable time where they step away from the urgent demands of their lives. And so one of the things rhythms can do, and one of the reasons you might think about putting intentional rhythms in your life for different reasons, is that they can free you from the tyranny of the urgent. There's a certain amount of mental freedom that rhythms bring to your life because they're a pattern that you establish. One of the things that actually happens is that your mind moves more quickly into those things because you aren't really deciding. It's just a rhythm. It happens. Most people don't spend any time each year deciding whether to celebrate Christmas. They just celebrate Christmas. I read about a guy who was trying to make his day off a more sacred time, where he really just turned off the computer and everything altogether. Rob Bell, it's an author I like. And one of the things he noticed after he established the rhythm for a while was that when he turns off his computer, because he has that rhythm every week, he turns it off on Friday at 4 and doesn't, or around 4 anyways, and he doesn't turn it back on until like Sunday evening. That when he turns the computer off, because it's a rhythm, his body is already anticipating the next thing, and he can feel himself physiologically relax. He can feel a change in himself as he turns his computer off. He did say, as him and his wife were trying to establish that rhythm, it was really hard in the beginning. It was like he didn't realize quite how constant the racing mind was until he was very intentional in trying to turn everything off for a day. But now that he does it, he can actually do it fairly quickly. I know for people who nap, for instance, as a rhythm in their lives, they nap easier because they're used to napping, and when they lay down, their body just goes right to sleep. They even, a rhythm as basic as what time to go to bed can be helpful because your body anticipates that and you move more quickly into it. And so utilizing rhythms in your life intentionally can help you transition more quickly into those different things that are the rhythms. Another thing that rhythms do is they reduce the amount of time you have to think about things. Like I have a breakfast I really love, and I'm not going to take the time to tell you about it, but you can email me and I'll tell you all about it because it's very healthy and it's very delicious, and I make it every day almost, and I don't think about whether or not to eat it because I love it and it's healthy. And I don't have to consider my options, so I don't have to use any thought time, any creativity. I don't have to use any of the self-discipline muscle in my brain to think about what to have for breakfast. So because it's a rhythm, now I don't have to use my brain to do it. Of course, there's a downside to that kind of rhythm, is that you can move into things with less mindfulness. And so, for instance, like I don't have to, I want to still eat mindfully, right? And so even though I'm not thinking about what I want to eat, I still want to be mindful as I'm eating. And there's some other things where you really want to be mindful, like prayer and things. So if you have a rhythm of prayer or meditation or personal growth reading or whatever like that, if that's a rhythm in your life, you run the danger of being able to move into it without being mindful of it. Most of us have been like tired or whatever and had the experience of saying the Lord's Prayer, for instance, and getting to the end and, there I am at the end of the Lord's Prayer and I'm not even sure what I prayed. And that's part of what enables that to even happen, is because it's a rhythm. If you drive the same way to work every day, most people have had the experience of getting to work and not realizing how they got there. And again, that's because you've made that a habit, a rhythm, and your mind can do that without your conscious. And so the danger of rhythms, and it's just something to be aware of, is that rhythms can enable you to do things without being mindful. And we want to be mindful. So, moving along. Rhythms happen intentionally and unintentionally in our lives, and sometimes, and this is really where I want to go with this, and where I want to spend the last part of our reflection together, is that a lot of the habits we establish are pretty intentional, like brushing our teeth or whatever. But some of the rhythms of our lives are sort of like those, like the bass drum. In fact, you don't, if you're listening to a song, you almost don't even notice the bass drum unless it's like "We Will Rock You," right? Or something, because the bass drum is just kind of keeping time in the song around, and everybody else plays around the bass drum. So you're hearing the guitars and you're hearing a saxophone or the keyboard or whatever, and and even all the other drum hits, right? Cymbals and stuff. But the bass drum is what's keeping time. And I think we have some bass drum notes in our lives, and those can kind of happen to us and become an unintentional rhythm in our lives. And it's really important to get that bass rhythm right to our lives. And so I want to spend the last little bit of our time together thinking about that bass rhythm of our lives. Boom, 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 boom. What's going on underneath everything else, because that's going to affect all the other rhythms. If someone's kicking a bass and they're not keeping a good time, or they're not keeping the time appropriate for the song, the whole thing's going to be a jumbled mess. So it's that bass note, and the bass note you can talk about that in a lot of different forms. I got 5 word pairs I'm going to put up on the screen here now, and I want to think about these word pairs a little bit. Because they kind of govern or at least they help us think about our basic attitude about lives and our basic reaction to circumstances in our lives. Often one beat is followed by another, but-um, 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 but-um. And so you can think of the first beat as the thing that happens to you, and then the follow beat as the way you respond to that thing. And so I would like to just spend a moment thinking through what this sort of base rhythm of our lives are, and give you a couple word pairs. And you could just think about these. I don't have much to say about them, except that I think these are good word pairs to think about and see where you are. Think about where you are on those, where the rhythm of your life is. So the first word pair is, does the bass boom, boom, boom rhythm of your life, does that move toward, is that moving toward faith, or is it moving toward anxiety? Is it moving toward trust, or is it moving toward worry? And the part of the message of the scriptures, it's certainly the message of the scriptures is not that nothing bad ever happens. It's quite the opposite of that. And it's also not that we're supposed to pretend nothing ever happens. And that's, faith is not putting blinders on our eyes. It's staring at reality and saying, I trust God to be working. And let me just talk for a moment about Jesus here as we talk about faith versus anxiety, because the Bible tells us, this is the message of the Bible. It starts in the beginning with God creating the universe very intentionally, and with the universe moving in a direction, trying to go somewhere and do something and be something. And then mankind appears on the scene, and mankind is in a position of dominion, where we're supposed to be working with God in this developing world that's going somewhere and doing something. And obviously there's a lot of ways in which we lose our way, and there's a lot of mystery about God, the one who created the universe. And the proclamation of the scriptures is that Jesus presents us God's face, is that Jesus presents us who God really is. And when we look at who God really is, when we look at Jesus, when we see how he treated people, when we see how he taught, when we see how he accepted, how he loved, how he forgave, how he was willing to talk to anybody, how he longed for every single person to come to a place of peace and wholeness and be redeemed, and find peace with God and with themselves and with everybody else. If that's the face of God, that's really very, 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 very cool. And what we see in Jesus is that even though around us all sorts of things happen, in Jesus we see that God is for us. If Jesus is the face of the creator and sustainer of the universe, then the creator and the sustainer of the universe is for us. He's on our side. He's in our corner. He's wanting the best for us. And that moves us on that scale from anxiety to faith. And it's not because of our knowledge of what's going to happen or our understanding of everything, but because Jesus presents us the face of God and we see that God is for us. Then we can move from a place of anxiety to a place of trust as we walk through all the unknowns that we face in our lives. So that's one word pair I would say is a rhythm that goes back and forth, faith and anxiety. Another basic drumbeat of our lives, boom, 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 falls somewhere on a scale between love and fear. The Bible tells us perfect love casts out all fear. And so fear is kind of the opposite of love, because love trusts that the best is going on and that one person has the best in mind for another. And in terms of God, that God has the best in mind for us and desires the best for us, so we don't have to be afraid. So fear and love are kind of in two different corners on the opposite ends of that scale. So where does that basic drumbeat of your life fall? Boom, 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 boom. Are you living more with love, or are you living more with fear? And kind of along the same line, the next word pair is grace and judgment. Grace and judgment. Grace is where you are proactively and indiscriminately kind to people, where you recognize your failings and their failings, and you're all in the same place, and you need love and forgiveness and peace and joy, and you're open. There's an openness to grace, an openness to other people, and a willingness to be with them however they are and whatever they're walking through and whatever they're going through and whatever they're thinking and however they look at life at the moment. That's all kind of being gracious. I mean, even think about someone you would say is a gracious host. They seem to... got a phone call there. Had to stop. Let me get my train of thought back. Judgment. Yeah, judgment's where we're closed off and we see them versus us. We see other people as the other, and we push them away, and we look at them as different than ourselves, and we build walls of separation between us and them. So that's another word pair. How's the drumbeat of your life? Is it going more toward grace or judgment? Another word pair, I would say, is the idea of abundance or scarcity. Are you living in a way that is defeatist, like nothing's ever going to work out right for me? Someone always, there's never going to be quite enough for me, or maybe I'm not enough. Those are all ideas of scarcity. Is whenever you feel that not enough, whether or not it's in what's coming to you or what you yourself are. That's all a scarcity kind of idea. Is that kind of the drumbeat of your life, or is abundance the drumbeat of your life? Is there enough for you and others, and enough coming to you? The last word pair I would offer you is the idea of gratitude on one end and bitterness at the other, which kind of, lines up a little bit with abundance and scarcity. Oh, and they all kind of line up. And if you're looking at the screen, you can see they all line up. Gratitude versus bitterness. Do you find do you find what there is to be thankful for in your life, or do you find what there is to be bitter and ungrateful about? This is one of those rhythms of our lives, especially this one, that can kind of sneak in. A lot of us have had times, if we look back, when kind of a complaining spirit kind of began to be part of our lives. And I don't mean like there's a spirit of complaining that is like possessing you. I mean, you just like you have kind of slipped into being the complainer. And when things are going, people ask how they're going, your first thought is a complaint about how they're going. Or are you finding things to be grateful for? Is your mind open to gratitude? So those are 5 word pairs to keep in mind and think about in regard to that, like very basic boom, boom, boom. What's a very basic rhythm of your life? Is it faith or anxiety, love or fear, grace or judgment, abundance or scarcity, gratitude or bitterness? So I want to close with 3 rhythms you can add to your life, or emphasize in your life, or resume in your life. 3 rhythms that historically have been very good for people, because in terms of altering that sort of basic drumbeat of their life, boom, 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 moving it to those positive side of those word pairs instead of the negative side. And these 3 rhythms are, one is regular spiritual time, and that can be meditation, it could be Bible study, it could be prayer, whatever. But regular sort of spiritual self-care time, connection with yourself and with God, has historically been a great way to affect that sort of basic drumbeat of your life. Another one that we talked about before, I have a whole sermon about it about 5 sermons ago, I think, is gratitude, and not just the sort of amorphous, fuzzy attitude of gratitude, but the practice and habit of really finding things to be grateful for and expressing that gratitude. If you can develop a rhythm of gratitude, you will notice that affecting your lives. And the third rhythm that has historically been, for most people, I know there's a tradition of ascetic monks who isolate themselves, but for the most part, gathering together with other people for spiritual growth and just sharing and human community and relation as a rhythm, as part of your life. Like we have small groups at our church. that I would like to see more people involved in, because that regular gathering is part of the rhythm of life for people who are moving that where they fall on those word pairs toward the positive side of those word pairs, toward faith and abundance and love and hope and those kind of things. So let me leave you with 3 questions to think about here as we're done. And here are the questions. Number 1, how is the basic rhythm of my life going? Going back to those word pairs. Where is the basic rhythm of my life? What's the drumbeat of my life? Is it fear or is it love? That's the basic one right there. Is it fear or is it love? And you can go through those other word pairs and see. And then the other 2 are quite practical. Do I need to add a rhythm or practice to my life? Well, we talked about those 3 on the last slide. And the last question is, do I need to discard a rhythm or practice? Maybe you notice that you really have developed kind of a habit of complaining, a habit of saying what's wrong, a habit of saying how things could be better or something like that. So do you need to discard a rhythm or a practice? Well, if you're still here, I want to thank you for listening, and I hope this has been a helpful benefit to you in some way. I really desire to be a person who is used by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, the Spirit that sustains the universe, to help people move from fear to love in every aspect of their lives. And so if you're here still with me, thank you for listening. You can subscribe to these on our YouTube channel, or our podcast can be found via our website, which is www.journeyoflife.org. And on the front of that website, you'll also find a button in case you feel moved in any way to financially support our ministry. Certainly it isn't necessary, but it's always appreciated. I am John Rallison, the pastor at Journey of Life Lutheran Church in Orlando, Florida. www.journeyoflife.org. If you're in Orlando, we meet Sunday mornings at 10 in the Lake Nona YMCA cafeteria, and we would love to have you join us. Thank you for being with me. God bless.